historically, psychological warfare is the prelude for the main event, so to speak. And so you have to understand the nature of the war. And in my opinion, this is an attempt to completely refashion the global political economy so that the previous paradigms of rule, be they liberal democracy, fiat currencies, neoliberal economics, use of mass propaganda, etc., all of these things seem to be waning in efficacy, or at least they did in the years leading up to 2020. And I think what they're trying to do now is to bring in an entirely new system, global technocracy, which is a totalitarian control system that allows the few to control the many using digital technologies. Now, of course, a global population of 8 billion people is never going to buy that. If they can see it for what it is, there'll be mass resistance. And so you have to go to war against them in order to force this on them, essentially. And the effects of the lockdowns, the masks, the injections, and various other forms of psychological operations in 2020 and 2021 were to confuse, disorientate, debilitate, demoralize entire populations so that they wouldn't have a clue what was really going on. And even if they did start to see it, they'd feel powerless and unable to resist. And unfortunately, you have to say that those psychological operations were largely successful because, yes, there has been resistance to the measures, but still today, I think that the majority of the population still doesn't see what's happening, and still there needs to be a lot more resistance quickly.
Mm. Do you think they've missed an opportunity to really put their foot on the accelerator there, though, David? Do you? I mean, I agree. I think it was largely successful, but was it successful enough? Do you think that, they haven't really landed the killer blow, and there's too many people that are awake up to what's going on?
Yes, I do think that. And to come back to our previous point about how a lot of this has become much more obvious now, I think that the situation is starting to spin out of control slowly but surely. They're making this big move, and in so doing, they themselves are deliberately undermining and dismantling the previous systems, including democracy. I mean, the hollowing out of democratic institutions has been going on for some time now, but I think now they're deliberately trying to undermine democracy so as to be able to make the argument, well, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have AI take decisions, political decisions? Wouldn't that be better than the problems that we currently have? And so if they're doing that, but the new system isn't yet implemented, they're trying to implement it in all kinds of ways, then we're in a period of what I call interregnum. There is no kind of paradigm of control which is completely effective at the moment. And I think even though everything that happened in 2020 must, in my opinion, have been planned for many years, if not decades, it was so coordinated, so ferocious, so malevolent. It didn't happen by accident. Despite that, the rollout of the psychological operations and of the shots and so on was in some ways rushed and botched, and there were mistakes, and some of the narratives became so self-evidently absurd, particularly in terms of the vaccine rollout towards the later stages, that they simply couldn't fly. Um, I don't think that they've managed to get as far with this as they would have liked. I remember back in December 2021, I was so worried because in the UK, the shots had been mandated for care home workers. And it was said that in April, they would be mandated for NHS workers. I think the NHS is the fifth largest employer in the world. I thought, what a precedent that would set. And I was aware that in other countries, this was even worse in terms of these shots being forced on people, particularly in North America. And I thought this is just absolute dystopia. And I was so worried for 2022. And then all of a sudden, in January 2022, we had the Canadian truckers convoy. Perhaps that had something to do with it, with physical mass protest all across Canada as the convoy passed through. But for whatever reason, all of a sudden, the COVID narrative was wound down. And then it was just Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. And that to me was a signal that they had pushed that as far as they could go for the time being. And I don't think it was as far as they would have liked. I mean, ideally, of course, they would have been able to inject everybody. So it's a precarious situation that we're now in. And I think it could go any which way.
Mm.
At the same time, the Canadians were doing the truckers' protest. The photo behind John is a photo of the largest rally in Australian history, which happened coincidentally around the same time. Was the convoy to Canberra. Definitely was the largest rally in Australian history. And the building behind John, the white building there, is our Parliament House. And even though that crowd were hanging around for almost 3 weeks, the politicians paid no attention to them whatsoever. None whatsoever.
Yeah.
So,
and this is a common theme transnationally. In the UK, there were multiple e-petitions to the government. And if an e-petition passes 100,000 signatures, then there has to be a debate in Parliament. And you might expect some serious consideration by the government. And over half a dozen times, these petitions were raised successfully against lockdowns, against masks, against injections, etc. And all that would happen, there was no serious debate in Parliament. All that would happen is that maybe half a dozen MPs would meet in a room, they'd have a chat for an hour, no substantive issues would be addressed, and then the government would simply reassert its position. And this has continued right the way through to the present. 2.75 million people in the UK 2 months ago signed a petition against digital ID. That's 4% of the population, including children. This is a major signal to the government that it should be paying attention that digital ID is not wanted. I don't think there even was a debate this time. It was just ignored. The government said, well, sorry, we're going to do it anyway. So this is part of the scale of the situation that we've reached now, is that governments are in open defiance of their own people. And what was so disturbing about COVID is that governments transnationally essentially went to war with their own populations. I mean, psychological operations are a form of psychological warfare. Then you realize we've got a major problem here historically, because it means that the social contract is broken. And the social contract is an idea which has been at the heart of Western polities for centuries. And so if that's broken, and if governments are actively attacking their own people, you can see how we are on the point of radical change in one direction or another. And I don't know which direction that will be, but the status quo is not tenable. Democracy, in any fundamental sense, is dead. This kind of theatre show persists, as it must, because the population must still believe that it lives in a democracy in some meaningful sense. Otherwise, there would be uprising and potential revolution. So they have to keep this show going. And now that it's pretty obvious in every country that the two major parties are really just a uniparty, they serve the same interests, the same powers. The whole left-right dichotomy has been seriously called into question. Well, now they've just taken it to a new level, and you have the rise of Farage and these kind of so-called alternative parties. But again, they're just there to hoover up dissidents and people who are dissatisfied with what's happening, but still can't see the scale of the problem. They still don't realize that democracy is being taken apart. And so we've seen a gradual development over the course of many decades towards a more globalized system, whereby, first of all, we saw regional organizations after World War II. We've seen bodies like the UN and the WHO and others. And then from the 1970s, the World Economic Forum, the Trilateral Commission, and others. But we seem to have reached a situation today where what was once called global governance is now being replaced by open calls for global government. And I think that this has been the goal for many decades. You can go back to the end of World War II, and the birth of nuclear weapons was being used as the pretext to call for global government. The idea was at the time, if we have a World War III involving nuclear weapons, it will be the end for everybody, allegedly. And therefore, the only safe way forward is a world government. These calls have been around for a long time, but today we can see it starting openly to form. So at the beginning of this year, 2025, a new organization was formed by the World Economic Forum called the Global Government Technology Center. And this is being used to push the idea of digital states all across the world. And also this year, the Ukrainian digital state was announced around the time of the formation of this Global Government Technology Center. And it's being sold as the model for all other countries to emulate. And you can look in country after country, and they all have these so-called digital transformation agencies or similar wording. And the push now is to digitize government and hand it over to AI as far as possible. This again is the dismantling of democracy. This is the building of dictatorship by algorithm, and it's very troubling that people don't see what's happening, because if this is allowed to go forwards, then what we will see eventually is indeed the building of a single global government, which will operate according to what the Bank for International Settlements calls a unified global ledger. In other words, all the data from all the different countries about everyone and everything will be put on a single ledger. And that means centralization and centralized control on a global level, because whoever has access to all of that data, and we're talking here about the technocrats, whoever can manipulate the algorithms, whoever knows all of this stuff, they have total control over everybody. So that is now what they are trying to build. And it might look as though different things are happening in different countries. We have, stable coins, for example, in the United States, central bank digital currencies elsewhere. Digital currencies in different countries might appear to operate on different ledgers, but the key term is interoperability, because provided all of these different things are interoperable, then ultimately they form a single global system. And that is the global technocracy that they are striving for.
Do you see any geopolitical players at the moment who are a thorn in the side of the New World Order, like Putin or Xi Jinping? Do you see them as part of the system, or do you think they're actively working against it?
They're 100% part of the system. This is a global operation that we're looking at. And the mission is, from their perspective, to roll out technocracy globally. Now, of course, this originates in China, with Rockefeller funding, mind you. But China, is what Ian Davis has described as the world's first technate. So when we're talking about social credit scoring, for example, China, as Patrick Wood's books make very clear, all of this was being implemented in China even pre-COVID. So the idea that China would somehow be opposed to the New World Order is laughable. Similarly, if you look at what's his name, Riley Waggaman, and he used to live in Russia. He saw firsthand what was happening, and he describes how essentially, yes, you have cultural differences and so on, superficial differences, but the same things are happening in Russia. You had the Sputnik vaccine, for example, in Russia, while we had Moderna and AstraZeneca and Pfizer and others across the West, but they still went for the rollout. They're still going for the digital currencies. All governments, all states are on board with the same technocratic agenda. So no, I'm afraid I don't see any hope in any government at this stage.
You've talked about psychological operations being a precursor to war. I'm talking to people in the know in the UK, for example, who are seeing a ramping up of military exercises over there. The Air Force are flying constantly every day. In the town of Norwich, there's a large presence of Swedish military, which a lot of people are wondering about. What's all that about? And it seems like NATO with the Brits and the nations of Europe want a war with Putin. It's like they're posturing for a war. And there are some thoughts that perhaps something like a dirty bomb will be let off in Russia somewhere to get Putin to fire the major shot. Are you seeing these sorts of trends, and are they alarming you?
Well, I think it goes far beyond that. So when we're dealing with war, and again, the purpose of this war is transformation on a global scale. Historically, the only times when that has been possible is through World War. So what I argue is that we are already living through World War III, and that this effectively began in 2020. However, World War II looked nothing like World War One. World War One looked nothing like anything that had come before. And in my opinion, World War III looks nothing like World War II. And so we need to get beyond just thinking about nation state versus nation state, fighter jets, maneuvers in the sky, conventional weaponry, bullets and tanks and so on. Because it's not that kind of a war. Fundamentally, it's a global class war. It's a war that's being waged by the few against the many. It's a war that's being waged by the transnational ruling class through its control over the means of production. For example, it prints the money, it controls the media, it manufactures the weapons, etc. All of that power is now being deployed against the people, against populations transnationally. And so this form of warfare is something new and historically unprecedented. And I describe it as an omni-war, because if you're going to fight against entire populations, you need to be able to subdue them in every way possible. So I think that this new form of warfare is being waged across every domain of human existence simultaneously, but by stealth as far as possible, so that people don't know what's happening. So, for example, you might look at inflation and the rise in the cost of living in country after country. And of course, they make up all kinds of excuses and pretexts for why this is happening. But the bottom line is it makes life just harder and more difficult for everybody. All of the programming that we see coming through the media and through mainstream cultural production, again, is designed to manipulate thoughts. The problems with migration that country after country after country has been experiencing, particularly since 2022, in my opinion, is not by accident. It's by design. It's designed to have socially destabilizing effects. And in my report that I wrote for Catherine Austin Fitz's Solari report, I produced a 22,000-word report called Omni-War, Exposing and Ending the Invisible War Against Humanity. And in that report, I go through all of the different aspects of how the Omni-War is being waged across all of these different domains. And it's evil genius, really, because people don't notice it, even though it's everywhere. It's almost like the oxygen that you breathe. You're breathing it all the time. It's everywhere. It's all around you. But you don't really notice it. You just kind of live in it. And this, I think, is what's happening. And so the situation is being made harder for everybody in all kinds of ways. And again, the ultimate purpose of this is that people will submit when the time comes to technocracy. And so should they manufacture a new financial crisis, for example, it could well be used to roll out universal basic income, and the universal basic income will only be awarded if you submit to the digital ID, the social credit scoring, and all of the rest of it. So in terms of these tensions with Russia, I don't deny that there are geopolitical realities here. But for me, you always have to frame them against the overall context of the Omni-War. So what are these tensions really about? They could well be about what they have been about since the Cold War, which is not just foreign policy terms, but actually having effects on domestic populations. So back in the 1950s, for example, if you can scare the entire US population that the USSR might drop nuclear weapons on it at any moment, it keeps the population in a state of fear. And again, this is key to the psychological operations. You know, what was the war on terror premised on? Fear that terrorists could strike anywhere, anytime. COVID, the deadly virus, so-called, could get you at any moment, any time. So they're very, very useful for maintaining the fear levels, which keeps the population more compliant and subservient.
So it sounds, David, from what you're saying, that one of the key aspects to fighting this World War III that we're obviously in is making people aware that we're in one.
The awareness is key because at the heart of this war is deception. As soon as the population realizes what is happening, what is being done, how it is being done, and why, there is sure to be enormous, enormous resistance. But at the moment, many people go around completely oblivious to what is happening. I have a section in that report called A Day in the Life, and it's just one page about a hypothetical kind of Joe Bloggs who's just going about his ordinary day. And there are all these signs of the Omni-War taking place all around him, but he just doesn't realize it because it just seems like normal life to him. And so that was my attempt to show people how this is being done.
Boy, aren't we seeing
It'd
that?
be great to, yeah.
We're just seeing that everywhere in Australia at the moment, and indeed around the world. People just seem to, they know something's going on. You can tell because a lot of people are coming to Christ. There's a lot of people wanting faith now. I'm not talking about religion because religion's a big part of this problem that you're discussing. Religion, corporatized religion, is right in the heart of this stuff. It's used to manipulate people as well. I'm talking about people having a relationship with Christ. There's such an increase. I myself have baptized 350 people in the last couple of years, people who want to, you know, I've had atheists come up to me and say, look, I don't believe in God, but can you pray for me? I mean, there's a sense of urgency around people at the moment.